Hello and welcome to our inaugural episode of Analytics Unscripted. A little bit later than we originally planned, but we're here, we're back. We have a bunch of episodes lined up over the next couple of weeks. And here we are. We're at episode number 1. Bav, we've just wrapped up our inaugural chat. We've covered everything from dashboards to AI to the future of data teams. We haven't solved any of it, but we've had a great chat. And I think that's the whole point, right? This whole podcast is about having a nice chat. Don't prep anything beforehand and see where things go.
Yeah, I think it's always going to be, this was always going to be an interesting angle for us because in the past, we've always taken a more structured approach to recording a podcast. And I think you and I both, one of the things we loved most about when we were recording podcasts was the conversations that went off piece that were really natural and organic. And I think what this podcast is a manifestation of that part that we've really enjoyed. And, this inaugural episode is the perfect way to kick off because we started without any real agenda. And somehow we found ourselves, as we always do, just normally we're not recording, in the deep end of a serious discussion around data, and in this case AI and the future of AI and the role of an analyst now that AI is here. And we've said AI so many times in the first 30 seconds, so do stick around and listen.
I think that's enough of us now. Stick around, listen to us chat. There'll be more episodes in the feed, so make sure to click the subscribe or like button. You'll find out why we're asking to like and subscribe later on in the episode for Bav's benefit. But without further ado, let's jump straight in. It's been a year, Bav. It's been a whole year since we left the Measure Pod. We had grand plans to come back a lot sooner, but as is life and work got in the way. But it's been a year.
I know. I still can't believe it's been a whole year. Where has the time gone? I think so much has changed for both you and me, not just because of the podcast, but also personally and professionally. So I feel like there's so much to catch everyone up on before we go into introducing guests and talking about data and analytics. And maybe that would be a really good starting point for everyone. By the way, guys, for anyone who's listening, the podcast is called Analytics Unscripted on purpose. And this really means Dan and I are going to be, I don't want to say winging it, but I feel like there's no better way to describe what we're trying to do with this podcast, which is just to have an unscripted conversation amongst ourselves with guests about what's happening in the world with data. It will obviously have a data flavor to an analytics flavor to it in general, but I feel like the very nature of being unscripted gives us a bit more freedom and flexibility not to have to work really hard beforehand trying to pull together an agenda and questions. And ideally, I think for me, it's a case of the thing I'm most excited about is how natural and free-flowing this is going to be. Or it's going to be a complete disaster, by the way. I don't know.
Who knows? That's where the power of editing can come in, right? I don't really plan to do much editing to this, but still, we can polish up those edges.
Yes, we do not have an editor for this show. We previously had an editor at MeasurePod, and I'm going to miss Will so much.
For sure. Well, let's see how this goes. As an unscripted nature. This also applies to the guests that we have on. Our mission with this podcast is to have unscripted, relatively unplanned conversations around the people in our industry and beyond. So it's going to be a bit more personal, a bit more deep divey, a bit more kind of like theme of the week, whatever we're going into. We're not going to have a prepped idea or topic for discussion. We're not going to have any notes to go into this. We're just going to have candid chats between us about what we're doing, the industries that we're in, and when we have guests on, we just want to find out more about them, what excites them, what they're working on, what are they stuck on, and everything in between. We'll actually be putting out messages on LinkedIn, the crap Slack, on Substack, when we have a guest well in advance. So if you wanted to throw questions in for us or the guests, every episode, our plan is to put a post up somewhere so that you can get your questions in. So you have a voice here as well, and we can discuss the topics that you raise for us.
Yes, definitely. So make sure you like and subscribe. Dan and I have been talking about this, and we both have a very different view about what growth means for a podcast, and we'll go into, I guess, later in this episode about vanity metrics and talking about what it's, why it's important, certainly for me, to grow a podcast, but for Dan, how that's, very low in his list of priorities of what a successful podcast to him means. And maybe we'll touch on that. So Dan, tell me, what have you been up to for the last year? What's changed since we've left MeasurePod?
Well, a lot, to put it bluntly. I left Measure Lab, which is where I started the Measure Pod. I joined a agency called Data to Value with a bunch of great people run by Rick Dronkers, friend of the podcast, Rick Dronkers. And since then, I've started my own thing up. And so I am working with lots of really fun and exciting, brilliant people and brands, doing my own thing, marketing, measurement and analytics and everything in between. So same but different. A lot of change and scary change. There's been some ups and definitely some downs in the last year as well. So for anyone that's read the Substacks will know what I'm talking about. Probably goes a lot towards why it's taken a year for us to record the first episode. But that is in the past. Things are looking great. Everything feels good. I'm really excited about spinning this back up. I'm really excited this year already about going to all of these events that I've gone to, meeting a bunch of people in the industry. I don't know. I feel like I've got a new sense of enthusiasm behind everything. And I feel all of the industry and tech changes that are happening, which I'm sure we'll go into loads in future episodes of this podcast. It's just really exciting. I'm finding it very exciting to be working within the marketing technology space at the moment. How about you, Bav?
Well, before I go on to me, Dan, I know you and I are both terrible at marketing, but you in that lovely little monologue you just gave, you actually forgot to mention the name of your new venture. So I think people might, if they want to Google what you're up to or find a website or something, you might want to give them that name, Dan.
Yeah, you can go on the Google, on the internets, and you can search for Kickflip Analytics, and you can find me on LinkedIn as well. It's just me. The brand does exist. I've got a website with a small blog and things like that. But yes, please find me, subscribe, like, follow, all of those vanity metrics that Bav loves so much. Please do all those things. I'll put some links in the show notes. If anyone's really keen, they can find me over that way. But I think going back to that, I thank you for letting me plug that, and I did forget genuinely to do that.
Well, it's just a good way to tie your personal self to your work self, right? Actually, fun fact: Dan and I shared the same last day at both our previous companies. I actually can't remember what the last day was. All I know is I just passed my 1 year anniversary of my new gig. So after leaving Lean Convert, hey Lean Convert fellows, miss you guys. I actually went back into an in-house role. So moving away from the world of consulting, which I really loved. I think everyone should try consulting at some point. Back into an in-house role at Huel. So Huel is, for those of you that don't know, are a nutritionally complete drinks based company, but we also do foods. I know Dan has been a long-time customer, and he asked me to look into how long he's actually been a Huel customer. So I think that was quite nice. And that reminds me, I need to give you my updated friends and family discount code. If anyone does want that and you're friends or family of this show, click like and subscribe and come and speak to me about it. So I joined Huel as director of data. I worked with a fantastic team of data engineers and data analysts, and we try and navigate the tricky world of nutrition and health-based food and try to get just people living a little bit healthier. So that's what I've been up to from a professional standpoint. I've been loving it. I still love it. I'm looking forward to where it goes. And on a very personal level, it's been more of the same stuff. Crap Talks has been going strong. We've already got the next 3 or 4 events locked into the calendar. We've secured the venues for those, so do keep an eye.
Amazing. So plugs and update done. Tick. This is an unscripted podcast. So I don't know if we've already mentioned it 15 times, and I think we're going to keep kind of reminding ourselves of that. I've been doing a lot in the space since the last time we had any kind of formal conversation, podcast recording, or guest on like this. For me, I'm most interested to get your opinion on where the role of an analyst, a data person, a data professional is going based on the changes we've seen in the last year. I know I'm structuring the question badly, but for someone who leads a data team in an organization that is data rich and a very sort of forward thinking in a modern company, a lot has changed with tech changes, data accessibility becoming cheaper, large language models becoming better at processing this and integrated more natively in all these products we're using. For me, it's like I get a little bit frustrated sometimes when I hear that, AI can't replace people, but all that boring stuff like analysis and data and dashboards, yeah, sure, why not? It's always the first victim for the AI replacement grand theory that people throw out there. And I feel like it's always been doing a disservice for people in these roles. Now, as people in these roles in the world of data, what the hell, man? It hasn't replaced us just yet. There's still a need for it. And I'm not here to kind of justify a role over AI, but I'm just interested to see what the hell's going on within a team of data professionals. What's changing? What are you thinking about? Where the hell do you see this kind of stuff going? And What do we need to do to stay relevant?
Right, straight in there with the heavy questions there, right, Dan?
Hell yeah.
No messing around, just straight in there. I think if we think about a year ago when we were recording more regularly with Measure Pod guys, we barely talked much about AI. I don't know if you remember, hardly any of our episodes. We might have touched on them very briefly, and we certainly didn't dedicate entire sort of like episodes to them, and they maybe came up in a passing paragraph or phrase or a short segment. But in the last year, it has absolutely exploded, and I think I actually wrote a post on LinkedIn recently about the shifting landscape right under the feet of data analysts and data professionals. And I'm going to touch on something we actually have talked about in the past, Dan, which is self-serve analytics. And you of all people know that I've always considered self-serve analytics as the biggest failure of my career. I've been reframing it over the years, and I think I've realized with AI, it's not been a failure. It's been more of a case of the ceiling was really low, and we just kept coming up against the ceiling. If we think about what, to that point about analysts being replaceable and data, boring work like analysis being replaceable, that was the opportunity to do that yourself was always there, right? I think most people made data available. You had access to the data, you had the charts and the dashboards you needed to do the job of quote unquote an analyst. But the underlying analytical methods and techniques and statistics and, deeper understandings of platforms like GA4 and, other platforms meant that actually from a self-serve perspective, people were just hitting that ceiling really quickly, which is I can look at the data, I know how to manipulate it, but I don't really have the foundational skills to do much more than that. And I think what AI has done, and I think this is why this narrative exists of boring work of analytics, you can't see me, I'm doing quotes, is replaceable. It actually is now to a certain extent, right? All of those challenges that people were facing themselves about, hey, look, I want to do this deeper analysis, but I don't know how to do it. It's now suddenly very, very accessible through AI. So I think that's where this narrative comes from. So how is it changing the role of data people and analysts? I think this now means that we actually have to adjust the way we work. So a lot of the stuff that my team and I are doing is we're rethinking about the phase 2 of self-serve analysis. And I use a quote, fish where the fish are. So we're trying to put the data where our stakeholders are. And I think this is really important for anyone who is trying to do some type of AI transformation. Don't pull people into where you want them to be. Try to meet them where they are. And I think that's going to become the role of an analyst. And it's going to be to put that data where they are and then shepherd them into using it and in many ways check their homework. And actually, by giving people an opportunity to do the stuff that we've always had to do in the past, we analysts can now do more exciting work, more interesting work, stuff that is a bit more proactive. We can go out and find problems instead of waiting for them to come to us. So I think this is actually a good thing in some ways. I'm a healthy skepticist when it comes to things like when it comes to AI. What about you? What are you seeing with your clients, I guess?
It's really divisive. It's really divided a lot of the clientele that I'm working with, which is what I'm seeing. Some of them are either gated by the organization, maybe it's a Microsoft organization and, Copilot is the only exposure they've had and it's a bit shit and they can't get access to like terminal-based, CLI-based sort of AI-ness, which has kind of really hindered their development in the space. That or they've kind of rejected the notion themselves or they don't understand it. I think that there's this perceived barrier of it's too complex or too complicated. It's the classic irony of saying I'm a non-technical marketer or I'm a non-technical data person or something like that, which is like, it doesn't exist. It can't be. We are technical, whether we admit it to ourselves or not. It's just a reality. So I think people maybe just bucket themselves in the place of like, oh, I can't do this. This is too far. This is too much, to whatever. Okay, there's the one route, which is like, it's not for us. I don't understand it. I can't apply it. And it's this fear of, whoever told you about the acronym FONCU, the fear of not keeping up. I think it's a better descriptor than FOMO, right? I think this stuff right now, especially with AI, is very much FONCU rather than FOMO, right? Because we're not missing out, we're just not keeping up. I feel like I do this every day, but I feel like I'm behind. And I speak to someone else and they're like, I feel like I'm behind and they're doing something different to me. And it's this really interesting concept that's going on. But there's two parts to this. I think being married to a graphic designer, I think this is a really interesting position when we talk about this stuff is like, everything that I'm using large language models and generative AI for is very much around automating the administrative aspect of my job. So as a self-employed person, I've completely automated my workflow in terms of like my Kanban board management and things like that, and invoice generation and whatnot. And that's been a huge asset to me. I don't have to manage and remember lots of stuff and manage things manually. It's all kind of sorted. There is the other side, which is the creative pursuit, right, of like doing the work. And I think that is an interesting sort of secondary bit, whereas I don't do that as much for that. So I get to build things, but I'm not creating things from scratch. I'm not asking it to be creative for me. I'm asking it to be a tool for me. And I think there's a distinction between the use cases here, which I think bucketing it into the kind of concept of AI, I think that's really interesting, or at least not doing it as good a service, especially when it comes to this data work, right? So doing analysis is a creative pursuit, one would argue. And I don't think necessarily a non-analyst is going to be able to do, and quote unquote, can't see me, quote unquote, proper analysis, but they can do basic stuff if they know what to ask for. The administrative stuff like accessing data, acting it. I don't have to access a dashboard, log in. I don't have to find a database. I don't have to access stuff and be granted, I think, through things like MCPs and whatever layers that we apply to this. I think that's kind of solved. I don't know. I'm riffing a little bit, but the idea there is I think you can just access the data and you can do what you want in any tool you want, meet the people where they are, like you said. But there's another side, which is still it's not opening the doors for analysis, quote unquote, right? It just doesn't do that for us for now, because I don't think, going back to the classic idea of prompt engineering, people don't know what to ask for. They're not asking the right questions. And actually that's where whatever specialist you are in your role, you have the right questions to ask. And the actual act of doing it is becoming more automated and systemized, but like you've got to have the right questions.
This is where I think, and this was kind of like my point, where the next stage for phase 2 of analytics and phase 2 of self-serve analytics is really about, and I want to use the analogy shepherding people, right? Like for the longest time, analysts and data people had to be the shepherd and the sheep, but now you're kind of giving people access to the data in ways that they've never had before. And they're able to use it through tools that never existed before. So your point around prompt engineering is still true, but it's a case of now as an analyst, I'm no longer getting a request and doing the work. I'm trying to spend more of my time saying, hey, look, we've got a request come through. My instant reaction to my team is, why can't they do it themselves? And it's not because I'm trying to offload work off my team. It's because I genuinely think the type of request that's come through is now so easily doable. Not all, I agree. There's when you start approaching multi-dimensional analytics problems, 100% you need a data person. But when it's a one-dimensional analysis, that is now well within the realms of doability from an LLM like Claude. So for me, I think it's like my vision, and I said this to my team, is that we never get another Jira ticket request ever again. So that was my my kind of like view on it. Something I want to touch on. I think when it comes to designers and the more creatives, I don't want to, again, like I think data analysis is a very creative field in many ways. It may not be traditional creative like design work or artwork or something like that, but I think there's an element of creativity that's required. And I think the use case of AI, certainly for everyone, this is bar no one, right, should be able to, I can't remember, I think you called it administrative, I call it operational work, administrative work should be 100% automated if you can figure out the underlying system that you need to automate. So I do this, then I do this, then this needs to happen, then I do this. That part should be automated, bring you up to do more of the more of the interesting stuff. I do have a gripe I want to talk about with this. One thing I've observed, and this is my rant, but I've been triggered recently about people complaining about AI replacing the design side of the work or the copy work, saying, oh, it's so unhuman, it's so da-da-da. These same people are quite happy to replace a software engineer. They're quite happy to do their own analysis. But heaven forbid AI starts to move into your world. Then suddenly it's like, whoa, right? Like what we do is an art. No, AI can't replace that. It's like, I could argue the exact same thing when it comes to data. But I think we all have to accept that there are certain aspects of our role which are completely replaceable. And that's why I use one-dimensional analysis and multi-dimensional analysis, because one-dimensional analysis, I do not want me or my team spending time doing one-dimensional analysis. But multi-dimensional analysis requires structured analytical thinking. And I want my team to spend more time on that.
Is the one-dimensional analysis the new word you've given to your okay, thanks questions?
There's a can of worms I wasn't hoping to open today. Yes, I think in some cases, yes, it is.
Okay, let's start. Explain what an okay, thanks question is and what that, because I think we can all relate to that, but we've got different names for it. And then tell me why that's different to your one and multi-dimensional questions.
So an okay, thanks question for anyone that's listening is when someone asks you something, you saying, hey, can you guys go and do this thing for me? You go away, you do the work and you give it to them and they're like, okay, great, thanks. And that's it. There's no action taken off the back of it. You don't really know what they're going to do with it. Obviously, you should be asking, as a good analyst should be exploring and being inquisitive about the need for a piece of work. Especially if you're on a ticketing based system, then you should have that question like, what are you going to do with this? Like, what value is it going to add to the organization? Blah blah blah, all of those things into it just to get people thinking. But that's what an okay thanks question is, and I would say all okay thanks questions are one dimensional, but not all one dimensional questions are okay thanks questions.
Okay, so one-dimensional questions are relatively straightforward one-track kind of analyses that may have an application and a thing that the stakeholder will do with it. So that's where the difference will be, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. It could be something as simple as, hey, we launched this product last week and we just want to know how it's doing against other products and compared to other product launches we've had. That for me is a one-dimensional question. It's basically going and saying, well, we launched this product. How's it done in terms of sales or orders or whatever? How does that compare to previous launches we've had in the past? And you might even want to take a little bit deeper and say, are we getting some new customers or is it cannibalizing old customers? That starts to move into more of a multi-dimensional analysis, but the one-dimensional aspect of that is very much like, hey, we launched this product. How's it doing? How does it compare to previous products we've launched in the past?
And so where does dashboarding fit into this whole process? So, I mean, one thing that's come up with for me a couple of times recently, I found really interesting is dashboarding being the output a lot of the time. But a dashboard is not a good format for a lot of questions that are by their nature going to change over time. So if you've got I need this on a repeatable basis that will never change or very rarely changes, dashboards are great. And I think that dashboards are often the default output. And especially when we've got things like large language models, MCPs, things that we can plug into. We can push things to Teams or Slack now. It doesn't have to be a dashboard. It's interesting for me to think about where dashboards sit now because that gap, the things they're solving for, is becoming, I think, narrower. Where does that sit within your scope of work, I suppose, with these types of questions, with the output of your team? Like, are you finding the same thing or are they still got like pride of place in a spot within your flow?
I think there are some really obvious characteristics, which is when there is something that needs to be constantly observed and measured over time, that should be in a dashboard. When there is something we need to measure against some target, that should be a dashboard. However, when context is required and it's more of a snapshot of a moment of time, that becomes a piece of analysis. So something can start off as a piece of analysis and then migrate towards a dashboard, and vice versa. Something that was initially a dashboard might trigger some questions that lead to analysis. And actually, in an ideal world, you get a bit of both. So I don't think this, the world of dashboards are completely dead. I do think there is such thing as too many dashboards. And in reality, what it should look like is you have a suite of your foundational dashboards. And then when people want to cut the data that's in those dashboards into sort of like really bespoke dimensions for themselves or look at it in a different way or isolate it to a country or a market, then they should be building on top of that for themselves rather than it being something that's saying, hey, can we now add this or can we add this? Or a good dashboard serves many. A terrible dashboard serves one person.
That's interesting. Let's pick on that. So I've always found that dashboards, for example, have to be stakeholder specific, not individual specific necessarily, but if you try to answer too many questions at once, it becomes either sort of scope and bloat creep to become kind of like redundant, or it's never, it's like classic. If you compromise between everyone, no one gets what they want. And it feels like it's not quite hitting the mark there. So I've always gone down the approach of like, hey, look, if this person and that team need a dashboard that's similar, we'll build separate ones and we'll make it specific for them. Let's make sure we know what questions they want to answer first, because I bet we might be using the same data, but like the questions they want to answer in the certain ways are going to be different.
So okay, you're right. Let me rephrase that. I should say.
Wait, let's clip that. He said I was right. Everyone can hear that, right?
Yeah, we can be done with this episode right here. Let me rephrase that. Dashboards that data teams build should serve many. But dashboards that say, for example, you, Dan, need for yourself, either should be something that you can just adapt of a pre-existing dashboard, cut in certain ways, or you should be able to build it yourself, right? I think if there's imagine you're a company of 500 people, but your analytics and data team is made up of 5 analysts. It's not scalable or sustainable for the 5 analysts to maintain all those dashboards, because it means that all their time is spent doing admin work. I think you're familiar with the concept of tech debt, right? I subscribe to the school of analytics debt. And the more dashboards you have, the more bespoke data models you build, the more upkeep is needed. So what I think is that the dashboards that your team maintain and build should serve many. And then you support stakeholders for them to build their own dashboards and they maintain them. So this is where I'm kind of and actually in most cases, I don't think stakeholders realize that the thing they're asking for, they're probably never going to look at more than after the time they've needed in that one instance in time. I think beyond a certain point, it becomes redundant.
Well, yeah, and that's fine because everything like this has a lifetime, has a usefulness window where it stops becoming useful. And I think that's fine too, right? There's no such thing as a permanent dashboard that lives forever because things change. So I developed this little framework recently. I'd love to get your thoughts on it because I think it's relevant here. There's 3... I class these into kind of 3 areas. We've got narration, which I think dashboards fit squarely into. It just says what happened, right? Or even if you've got a predictive model, what's going to happen. But either way, it's just reporting facts and things and figures. And then you've got the commentary, which is kind of why it happened. And then you've got insight, which sits on top of that, which is what are we going to do about it next? What does that change in our plans? And the way that I've been working with people recently on this is that the narration part is where dashboards sit, is perfectly fine, and it's fully automatable, right? We shouldn't need to reinvent the wheel every time for what happened, how many clicks did we get and what's the trend? The commentary is 50% automatable, right? There's things like Google rolled out a new algorithm to search, their search algorithm, and so we can say something happened there, but it also needs subject matter expertise from, whoever that person is to kind of say, oh, it's because of this. We had a sale, so we saw a spike in the conversion data, right? But the insight is often the bit that's forgotten and not forgotten. What I mean is that when someone says, I need a dashboard, or when people don't look at dashboards, maybe if you're the one that's built them, it's probably because the stakeholder mostly wants that last piece, which is what am I going to do? Tell me what to do about this. And now a dashboard will never do that. And that's why I kind of reject any time I see a text box in a dashboard, because let's not try and make the narration thing do the commentary or insight here. This is great tool for narration. We've got the commentary, could be anything, a newsletter, an email, a Slack message. The insight could be let's say you're an agency, you've got a monthly meeting with a client, kind of like the QBR or whatever you've got. But that's, I think, what people want. And I think if people want to know, what do I do about this? How do I beat this? How do I beat competition, beat targets, hit metrics we've set for ourselves? And we provide them a narrative dashboard. That's, I think, a big disconnect. So I think that's where, for me, the dashboard is perfect at doing this one job. But I think this is where you were saying about having it sort of suit everyone or kind of fit the person. But when people, I think this, for me, the biggest awakening moment and the biggest eye-opening moment for this is if someone says, I need a dashboard, right? Dashboard is the vernacular people use because they don't know any other words to use, right? And actually, a lot of the time, they probably don't need a dashboard, but maybe they need guidance or advice or some kind of thing to make a change that they can push up the food chain to kind of justify an increased or decreased budget somewhere.
I mean, I completely agree. I think a dashboard tells you what happened. Then you've got context. This thing happened, and it happened because of X, Y, and Z. Or at least we believe it happened. Could you try and tie what happened with why it happened, right? Or what were the events that caused it to happen? So, you changed prices, there was a new product launch, you pulled back marketing spend, we're seeing rising CPMs, whatever it might be. That's the kind of why. And then you're right. Then there's the what we're going to do about it. But that's the part where it becomes a dance with analysts and stakeholders. And I think that the what happened, the why it happened, the context, and then what we're going to do about it, that is the key thing. So I couldn't disagree with you on that one. What I will disagree with is this time-old notion that people are asking for a dashboard when they really mean it. I think most people nowadays, I'm rarely one to give credit to stakeholders, but I think we're reaching a point where people do know what they want or what they're looking for. And I think as data people, we rarely come. I can't remember the last time someone asked me for. Okay, in the last year, I think there have been 2 instances where someone's asked for a dashboard, and I said, "You don't need a dashboard, you need analysis." And since that point onwards, since I've been able to distinguish that request hasn't come up again. So I think when people ask for a dashboard, it's because they truly believe they need a dashboard, and when people want to understand what's happened or what we should do about something and can we analyze or can we spot patterns and trends and things like that, I think they may not say the word analysis, but they intrinsically mean an analysis. So that was the only part of your monologue there which I would disagree. I completely agree with what happened, context, and what are we going to do about it. I think we should as in the data industry start moving and elevating our stakeholders to sort of like the next plane of toddler to maybe teenager.
Well, stick around. We'll discuss how to do all of that with all the secrets and everything else in future episodes, I'm sure. But speaking of, we need to wrap this one up because we have got some guests to line up, some other episodes to record, and some other conversations to have. Remember, we're going to be pushing out stuff on LinkedIn. If you're part of the crap Slack community, we'll be over there pushing messages when we have guests and new episodes. We've also want to do something slightly different with this podcast. We want people to anonymously contribute. So if there's any mess ups, things that you've done, maybe things that you just want to vent about something that's happened within your role, within your industry, within your job, submit the super secret form that we've got within the show notes. That just is a way to anonymously contribute into this, and we'd love to read out your stories, your confessions, your rants on the podcast.
Before we close off though, Dan, first of all, thank you everyone for listening to the first episode and making it to the end. I hope you enjoyed Dan and I just riffing about BI and reports and dashboards. I don't think we actually came to a conclusion, but I think that was the point. It's just we had a bit of a discussion. At the start of this episode, we said we'd talk about likes and vanity metrics, and I feel like we need to just quickly touch on that really briefly. So I believe vanity metrics are important. I don't like the name vanity metrics, but let's just go with that because that's an industry accepted term. So when Dan and I were talking about kicking this up again, I kind of said, hey, it's great when people like and share, and there's that kind of like moment where you kind of like a post does is semi-successful. And for me, that intrinsically represents a successful thing that we're doing, and it's resonating with people and with sharing stories. And so I look at likes and subscribes not as a ego boosting thing, because Dan and I don't get paid for any of this stuff, right? So we do this for free. So when I talk about liking and subscribing, it's so that we can reach more people. And if we're reaching people and people are sharing it, then it gives Dan and I certainly gives me the right signal that what we're doing is adding value to people. Now, Dan has a different view, and I'll let him share his, but my view on it is that engagement and growth of engagement is a signal to ensure that Dan and I stay on the right track.
Okay, so my side of this, and we are talking purely about podcast metrics here, not like KPIs within businesses or marketing teams or anything, but I suppose it can apply. For me, I get the most joy and I suppose the most reward from doing something like this podcast or running events and things is when people come up to me and say, I really like that. That was cool. And for me, vanity metrics don't do the same thing. So if one person drops me a message on LinkedIn and just goes, I really like what you're doing. That's really cool. That episode was great. That's all I need. That's all I need. So if you see me, let me know, and that will keep me sustained. The vanity metrics don't scratch that itch for me. So I think I'm just a bit more needy, I think is what I'm saying here. I think
we're both needy, Dan. I think that's what we're saying. But for me, I don't think people come up to you. I think one of the best things about Crap Talks is, and whilst I don't know the full extent of it, in many ways, people have come up to me and said, hey, Bav, I really enjoy Crap Talks. I really enjoy the event. Not everyone does that, but I know by the fact that they keep coming up. So for Crap Talks, for me, the measure of success is when the event gets completely packed out and we're in a room full of maxed out audience capacity. That for me says more than someone coming up to me afterwards, because I know it takes a lot to go up to say, hey, I really like that. Not everyone does it. People are introverts, especially in the data industry, and it's not always something that you just naturally do, but by showing up over and over again, engaging with the content, for me, that's my needy side, is where I know that what I'm doing is, I hope, adding value. So that was the disc. Yeah, that's what we meant at the start of this episode. about vanity
Okay,
metrics.
cool. So like and subscribe for Bav, and just drop me a message on Slack or LinkedIn for me if you can. That would be so lovely. All right, that's enough of this one. Let's get some guests lined up. Let's get some people in. Let's talk about all some interesting stuff, of which is TBC. All right, thank you for listening.